Welcome to the Cognitive Crucible, produced by the Information Professionals Association. Our website is information-professionals.org, where you can find links and information about today's conversation and get access to members-only content. Join John Bicknell and explore all aspects of our generational challenge, cognitive security. The Cognitive Crucible is a forum that presents different perspectives and emerging thought leadership related to the information environment. The opinions expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association.
Hello, this is John Bicknell. Before we kick off this week's discussion, I'd like to remind listeners that we have a fantastic opportunity in the not too distant future. We are going to have a live recording podcast event with an absolutely fantastic panel of guests. After the guests present a short topic, then audience members are going to have the opportunity to ask questions of the panel members. But in order to participate, you're going to have to be an IPA member. So head on over to information-professionals.com and join up to become a member and support our mission if you have not done so already. And stay tuned over the next few days for additional details about how you can participate in this exciting event. And now on to today's discussion.
My guest today on the Cognitive Crucible is Hank Thomas, who is a cyber and national security focused venture capitalist, founder and CEO of Strategic Cyber Ventures, which is a Washington D.C. based venture capital firm focusing on future-proof security technology. Hank is also a former U.S. Army intelligence officer. He leverages 24 years of experience to identify, invest in, and mature differentiated technology teams positioned to revolutionize national security. He is also a member of the board of directors for several cybersecurity technology companies. Hank Thomas, welcome to the Cognitive Crucible.
Hey, thanks for having me, John.
The discussion that I'd like to have with you today is about national security engagement with the private sector, especially the tech sector. But before we get into these topics, I'd like to get your take on our current climate.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my vantage point here inside the Beltway, but also kind of straddling to the world of Silicon Valley, if you will, which is expanded beyond Silicon Valley, obviously, is that it's still very antiquated. That would be the word I use. You still have a number of large defense contractors that kind of run the show, and it's difficult to kind of for earlier stage cybersecurity companies, which is what most of my portfolio is made up of, but any early stage tech company to map out a path to doing business with the government and being involved in national security problems.
Right. So you're obviously quite tied into the bleeding edge tech related to cyber. To the extent that you're comfortable, what are the most interesting, exciting, and maybe possibly even worrisome trends that you are seeing in the cyberspace?
So, with cyber, you constantly have a global network of adversaries working to defeat whatever security solutions are already in place. So it's part of the interesting part of it is that you always have new companies spinning up to solve those problems. But one of the problems is also you now have this glut, this army of hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands really now, of sort of point cybersecurity solutions out there, none of which have really been cobbled together into comprehensive platforms to solve security problems. So unless you have a large security budget and a real understanding of how to sort of patch these different, let's call them infantry units. We were both military guys. Like if you don't know how to combine all your infantry together, you're going to have big holes in your lines, and adversary is going to make it through it. So that's one interesting part about it, and that's one problem associated with cyber. Where I'm most excited about right now is mostly in places where I think a lot of Washington and the Pentagon and maybe even other venture capital firms aren't looking. It's security solutions that are being built for me on blockchain technology. And I know like blockchain is an overused term Specifically, we've been looking at security and privacy solutions being built around the Lightning Network for Bitcoin. And these aren't fintech companies. These are companies that are essentially creating, using existing cryptography to build security solutions. So I think it's an underserved place to look for security solutions these days.
So you're saying that the security that you're seeing around blockchain is some of the more interesting, exciting stuff?
Really, it's I wouldn't look at it as blockchains. At first, I was skeptical, but I think that some of the things are being built around the Bitcoin blockchain in particular, but maybe it'll end up being another blockchain, could ultimately become a Web 3.0, which will solve many of the security problems we have today. So essentially building a new internet, or building a off-ramp to a more secure internet that certain business functions can take place on that need to be super secure. And then you can take an on-ramp back onto the regular internet for maybe applications that need to be less secure.
So my understanding of blockchain is that it's what they say, how they call it, the indelible ledger that cannot be altered without it being obvious to whomever is monitoring the blockchain. So that's one form of security, in that hand waving here, let's just assume that that is true. So that's one form of security, in that the people who are interested in the data associated with that blockchain have some level of assurance that the data itself has not been tampered with. But that does not then preclude other security measures needing to be in place relative to blockchain, like just being able to see the data or access the data. Those cyber related challenges still exist.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, this is early innings. Cybersecurity itself is already in early innings. Let's say we're in the second inning of the game in traditional cybersecurity. With some of the solutions that are being built up around blockchain security tech and blockchain in general, we're still warming up. We're still in batting practice. This is not solving all the security problems right now. I guess I just see like over the horizon solutions being built, and we're funding some of these super early stage companies right now that ultimately have a goal of building a new internet, and that's what I'm most excited about. So it's a new, more secure. If you look at the way the U.S. government divides up its classified networks between like NIPRNet, SIPRNet, JWICs, things like that. I kind of look at it that way. You use JWICs for certain things, and then you pop back down to SIPRNet for other things, and then you go down to NIPRNet for other things. I view this Web 3.0 that's kind of being built as a JWICs-like entity for maybe the financial services industry, or just people that want to have super private, censorship-resistant communications to take place in this new domain, and then bounce back to a more easy to use domain for things. So that's where I'm kind of most excited about right now.
Cool stuff. What role does deception and misinformation play in the cybersecurity business, at least as far as you've seen? And how do these sorts of activities impact cyber defenders' ability to protect systems and networks?
I would say not a big enough role. I mean, when I was, it is playing a role now. I found that people with military backgrounds that are now in cybersecurity, like commercial cybersecurity positions of authority, are more inclined to consider deception than maybe somebody that grew up in the IT shop of a place and then are now charged with cybersecurity as a job function as well. Because I think deception seems like a scary thing to people, and just the name itself is like, no, I don't want my professional I don't want one of my professional responsibilities at a Fortune 500 company to be deception, but we've got to get past that sort of stigma around it, because it's a very, very useful tactic or technique or procedure, however you're deploying it, to either have an early warning system for adversaries coming on your network, or to channelize adversaries to places that they don't necessarily want to go so they can do less damage. There's all sorts of fun things you can do with bad guys once they break in if you're using deception tactics. Another reason why it's still kind of an underserved capability right now is many of our laws are not updated enough to allow some of the more advanced deception tactics to take place, because general counsels for many more conservative companies were concerned about deploying deception technology on their network. Because, for example, I'll keep it brief, but if you were to put a fake file on a network somewhere, and you would put let's call it a beacon of some sort in it, sort of like a die pack at a bank, and an adversary stole it and took it somewhere else, and it was beaconing out. In certain states, you were essentially hacking back. Even if an adversary stole it and took it somewhere else and it was beaconing back out again, it could be considered hacking back, and it technically be violating a number of laws. And so people were concerned about doing that in the commercial world. But I think these barriers are coming down, and people are starting, and the laws are starting to change to be more inclined to allow these things to happen.
That is fascinating, and it jives with a non-attributional meeting that I was in, where this gentleman was talking about how the private sector is starting to get fed up with these costs that they are shouldering, because and basically being handcuffed to do much about it. And so it wouldn't surprise me if the corporate world starts going on the offensive. And maybe I'm using scare quotes here, like they're not really attacking, but doing stuff to the bad guys that are going to start putting costs back onto the bad guys. And what you were just describing, I think, is a perfect example of that. Wow, that's cool. Also, while you were talking, I was reminded of a previous episode that we had with Boyd Brown, who I believe you know, Hank. And but he described another technique which is coming online, and this was a year ago, so I'm sure it has advanced. But as bad guys get into an ecosystem, there are capabilities now that essentially send the bad guys into what would be kind of like a hall of mirrors, where they're in, but then they get vectored into some area where it just winds up wasting their time. They perhaps believe that they're doing something destructive or interesting or valuable to them, but really it's a waste of their time. Are those kinds of things maturing?
Yes, absolutely. Those are some of the more easy to deploy solutions out there, and deception tech that does those things. That Hall of Mirrors is an excellent way of describing it. I kind of even think of it sometimes as like a supermax prison, where you get in, but you don't really know what's up or down or where the light's coming from. But you get around the corner, and there's something over there, but you don't really know what it is. It's more than that, really, though. I mean, that's one thing you might want to deploy if you're trying to slow someone down. But if you're trying to waste someone's time, you can also build like very, very lucrative lures that look like high value targets. And an adversary will get there, and you can make those high value targets look as real as you want, as you have the budget to do. Because you can have a lure that after 5 seconds, an adversary is going to figure out that it's fake. You'll be alerted that they're touching it, but they're going to move on to the next target to see what it is. But if you make something realistic enough and lucrative enough, and have like real data in it that is it going to impact you? They're going to spend all their time on that. And that's more time for you to shore up your defenses somewhere else.
Right. Is that the same concept as a honeypot?
Honeypots are another problem with deception technology is that honeypots are often, they're often considered to be like essentially just a honeypot. But the way modern deception technology works is it's not just a place to do, honeypots are essentially a place to do research where you could learn about how an adversary does things so that you can maybe build a fake hospital. That's your honeypot. You learn about how adversaries attack a hospital, and then you take all that information and intelligence from that honeypot and you shore up your defenses at a real hospital. These are, let's call them micro honeypots that you can sprinkle about a network, and they're really more like landmines that have information in them. So they don't blow up in your face, but they set off a sort of a silent alarm, and they also, the adversary is interested enough in them that they're going to dig into them to figure out what's going on with it. So yeah, they're a lot more, it's less of a research tool and more of a active security control.
Right. Fascinating stuff for sure. Yeah, I keep coming back to this. It seems to me that a emerging strategy that is perhaps not very satisfying, but it may wind up being a long-term technique that is actually pretty fruitful, is the whole notion of is cost functions, and increasing their costs while decreasing our costs. If you do that across the long run, then that could be a winning strategy. But we, the collective we, are doing this big mindset shift from kinetic operations where it's maybe a more immediately satisfying knowledge that you've done damage to the enemy in some way, to this less satisfying but somehow way of inflicting slow but steady effects over time. Do you think there's something to all that?
Yeah, I think it's tough for our, especially the defense industrial base, I think, to sell that.
Yes.
So they sell other things. But it has to evolve in that direction, and we have to figure out a way to measure it in some way. Because right now we don't have a really good way of measuring it, and it's going to be difficult to do. But I think you can do it by measuring productivity of the entities that you're protecting. And I think there's a number of ways you can measure it. We're just gonna have to develop new ways of measuring things to determine what success looks like.
Yeah. Good point on the sales, the sales aspect of that. And I obviously was not doing a very good job of selling it either. But anyway, I think all of that needs to be refined a little more. I'd like to turn the page a little bit here and talk a bit about entrepreneurialism and venture capital. Could you, well, maybe you're an entrepreneur. Could we start with your own personal entrepreneurial journey? We have people on this podcast who are either small business owners or are in the military. They're going to be getting out, and they're thinking about their own business aspirations on the other side. And so this is a topic that comes up every now and then. So I'd love to understand your personal entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, I grew up an Army brat. And then I was in the Army for 8 years after college and ROTC. And so I didn't really ever know a entrepreneur per se. I had great role models. I was surrounded by world-class leaders growing up and lived all sorts of interesting places, but I never really thought about having an entrepreneurial journey of my own. It was, even when I left the military, I didn't even consider starting my own company because I didn't know how to start a company. And I think we're missing out, especially in the security world, we're missing out on a whole crop of talent, especially inside cybersecurity organizations, that when they leave government service, whether it's in the military or something else, it might be easy to hang up a shingle and start a one-man consulting firm. I wouldn't say that's easy, but that's the easiest path to being an entrepreneur, because you could quickly, see revenue and but if you want to start something maybe bigger than that, like a software company or a security company, how the heck do you even do that? And so we don't want these ideas just coming out of Silicon Valley where there's a million venture capitalists and everybody out there knows a VC. We need pockets of investors, other places that are connecting to real operators inside of government. And I was lucky enough to meet an investor who liked my idea. And I really didn't even at the time know that I was pitching the person on starting my own company. I was talking about security, helping them with their security problems, and building out their security regime. But the person was interested enough in investing more in security solutions. And I said, why don't we start a venture capital firm? I don't even think I called it a venture capital, an investing firm focused on, I'll find, how about this? I said, I'm going to find really awesome security companies for you to invest in if you just give me the money to do it. And then we sort of backed our way into being a venture capital firm focused on cybersecurity. And now we've opened the aperture up to other things. And that was only because I was lucky enough to meet a person that was both inclined and resource capable to do this. So, but I would say entrepreneurs out there, they need to, if they reach out to investors enough, and people will actually return especially if they're like technical enough and they have like real ideas and maybe a one-page slide. A lot of VCs will just respond to people and say, yeah, I'll take a meeting with you to learn about what you're doing. It'll be a 15 or 30-minute meeting. And, but not enough people do that. I do it all the time. I meet with people all the time. It never leads to anything, but a lot of times it doesn't lead to anything. But I say that maybe they left learning that there are people out there that might invest in them when they have a good enough of an idea.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So what kinds of things do you look for in a company or in a founding team when you're considering investing in them?
Yeah, I would say pre-seed round. So like maybe before they have a real product, before they have a minimally viable product, it's all about, it's really all about like 3 buckets: vision, their own ability to communicate that vision, and just how passionate they are. We have, this is going to sound crazy, but I've had opportunities to invest in, sometimes I look at the car that the person drives up in, and if they drive up in a Mercedes and they're a little bit more established in their career, I'm probably going to judge them a little bit and be like, I'm less inclined to invest in this person than the 30-year-old hustler that has an idea but is barely making it, and you can feel their passion. Because I think you're going to have to pivot so many times as an entrepreneur, especially if you're building a software company like we invest. You're going to have to pivot so many times that it is exhausting, and you're going to need the energy to kind of like, and the passion to make it through that journey. And so it's that, and then if it's after seed phase and it's like a little bit more of a established company, it's really about the team you've built and how telling me how you've been able to pivot so far, maybe through the seed phase, and how your product has evolved to what it is that you're asking me to invest in. And because it's going to continue to have to evolve. And I've always said it also needs to, in security, it needs to be mapped to real world requirements, whether those are requirements that exist right now, like there's actively defending against them, or some over the horizon requirement you can convince me exists.
Okay, that's helpful. So when someone shows up and it's obvious that they're on the ramen budget, That's like a +1 for you.
It's like a
sometimes.
+1. Yeah, you get like a little bonus for that.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. So as you're conducting your due diligence on potential acquisitions, do you encounter and how do you navigate any kind of misinformation or disinformation or marketing fluff that, I mean, people want to present the very best image to you. I mean, how do you validate that what they're presenting to you is legit compared to a Potemkin village or something like that?
It comes down to a lot of times the adjectives and pitch decks, so words like solves, if somebody says this solves a cybersecurity problem, that's a big red flag. If people don't admit they have competition, even if it's not a direct competitor, but maybe a competition for budget, if you're not smart enough to know that you're competing for budget, it's generally, I want you to talk to me extensively about your competition. I don't want to I don't want to spend 1 second on it. I want to spend 30 minutes on who's your competition out there and know that you've thought through who they are and what they're doing. So that's a big one for me. I would also say if you if you come in and maybe your story, you're unable to pitch what it is you're doing to a non-technical person, then you're probably never going to go anywhere, because you're going to constantly be having to explain what it is your thing does to a decision maker that probably isn't very technical. So those are my three big things I look for. Yeah.
Right. You touched on this just a little bit, but I guess I wanted to ask maybe in a slightly different way. But could you talk about the way that you perceive the role of entrepreneurship in society, and maybe even maybe weave in some advice that you would have for anybody listening who is thinking about the entrepreneurial route?
I don't think we do enough to teach, whether it's in high school or no one ever explained to me that this was an option ever, and so I think we need to, especially post-pandemic world now, so many people are leaving their jobs and doing other things. I guess people are discovering how to do this on their own, maybe, but honestly, there are so many problems to solve out there right now when it comes to security, privacy, even things like just resilient technology, and just coming up with solutions for and pathways for things like solving the supply chain issue and stuff like that. We've got to do, it's almost like you could have we need more tech schools focused on entrepreneurship. There's just simple things I feel that we could incorporate into curriculum all over the place, that would hasten the development of more and more kind of people that are willing to make the leap. Also, there needs to be a bit of a safety net, because if you're going to start a software company, you're not going to be profitable for years. So you got to figure out, I'm not saying a social safety net, but people need to understand that venture capitalists like me, we don't expect you to be profitable. You need to know that we don't expect you to be profitable anytime soon. This is a long journey to profitability. And so I don't think a lot of people understand that. So they just bypass the concept of developing maybe a software company because they just see burning money for years. How is that even possible? That's why venture capital exists. To help you burn that money for a couple of years in hopes of building something amazing.
Awesome stuff. Several months ago, Hank, we had the former president of Estonia, a gentleman named Mr. Tomas Hendrik Ilves, on the podcast, and we'll have a link to this in the show notes. But one of my takeaways from my discussion with him is that Estonia is really a major world leader when it comes to cyber and digital security issues. Do you have anything to comment on all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody that's got a gun pointed at them 24/7 improves their security. And so if you look at countries like Israel, you look at Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, anybody that is constantly like living and breathing an active threat to their way of life is going to take it more serious than someone else. And as a result, the Baltic countries have built some amazing security in both institutions and technology, and they've figured out how to incorporate it with their military, probably in ways that we haven't even thought of yet, because sometimes we're pretty arrogant about, we're the best at everything, but it may not, our best may not be as integrated as theirs. And I hear from a lot of people that, and I've seen firsthand that people that are in that situation, they have a gun pointed at them, literally, they take it seriously and they build really awesome stuff. And so I believe that's what's happening there.
Right. And they have a vivid real world experience, unlike the United States. Some of our recent experiences with cyber related attacks don't even compare to what happened to Estonia in, I think it was the 2007 timeframe. Would you say that that's fair?
I think that's fair. I think, I think there are active things happening that to us all the time that, and they're, yes,
right. There's things happening to us, but they haven't had the population level impact that the Estonian 2007 attack had on their citizenry.
That's right. Yeah, things don't really change here until everyday citizens feel it. And so, if this cyber war is taking place, mostly at Fort Meade right now, and it hasn't really impacted, the average person in Iowa. So it hasn't really changed the way we do things necessarily yet. Even these ransomware attacks and other things, people continue to just kind of insure, literally buy insurance instead of cybersecurity in many of the corners of our society. And it's not until, the impacts of cyber war kind of reach further down that I think maybe we'll sort of be at the level of an Estonian.
Wow. Yeah. What are your observations about government engagement with commercial tech? Have you, if you can scan over the last couple of years, have you seen more engagement recently, less? What is changing that you've observed?
I've seen a number of organizations and stand up that are tasked with being that, championing that engagement, whether it be DoD outposts in Silicon Valley or investment arms of the services tasked with, co-investing with venture capital or investing solo into early stage stuff. But what I haven't seen is, and I know a few of these exist, and maybe I just haven't been invited. I don't know, but there hasn't been a robust inclusionary effort to bring in. There are a number of people like me out there that are focused on, like my firm, that are focused on essentially national security technology. And why are we not all involved in some sort of collaborative effort quarterly or annually or monthly? There are a lot of people, I think, like me, that would volunteer their time to work on solving problems. And but I'm rarely asked to volunteer my time for things like that, because I don't think that, maybe they just don't think that people will volunteer their time, but it's improving. I see increased government involvement in things like the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, where I think a lot of emerging technology comes out, and they're there and they're active participants. The government actively involved in things like the Black Hat Security Conference in Las Vegas every summer, the RSA Security Conference in San Francisco every year. It's not just like an us versus them, commercial versus government, find the Fed mentality. It's changing. And I think one of the bright spots in government cybersecurity right now is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, under DHS. They really seem to be bridging the gap between the intelligence community and traditional DoD cyber, and focused on homeland cybersecurity, rightfully so. That's the agency they fall under. And I've been happy to see that their budget is increasing, and they seem to have sound leadership there.
Okay. So this is one of those questions like, if you had the ear of the President of the United States for a few short moments, or some other really influential government official, what couple of things would you want to impart to that person?
I think I would say to the president that, and I know this is a controversial leadership tactic, but when it comes to something like cyber, you absolutely, if there was a traditional national security issue, he essentially has one throat to choke when it comes to getting the job done. And the president can go to the Secretary of Defense. I imagine that would be the throat he would choke in that scenario, and say, get this done, or why didn't this happen? In cyber, and I imagine the president already knows this, but I think that we need to fix this very soon. We need I know we have a cyber czar now, but that cyber czar in many ways is, you hear about that person less than you hear about the director of the NSA, or the commander of Cyber Command, who's also the director of NSA, or the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, or the FBI, or that. My point is, we're still way too bifurcated when it comes to cybersecurity, and it's going to eat our lunch when somebody decides to get serious about an Estonia-like attack, like we were talking about before. And I would encourage the president to create a more centralized command for cyber around our critical infrastructure and beyond, because while it hasn't happened yet, when it does happen, it could be truly devastating. And I think the president knows this, because there's exercises run in the military all the time that show what could happen if certain things happen in cyber to our infrastructure. And you're talking about a mass casualty event beyond the likes of something we've ever seen before. I'm not trying to be extravagant about this, but we need a centralized command for all of our cyber. And I don't know if that's a very palatable thing here in Washington, because you like to have these pockets of power, because for a variety of reasons, but that's something that needs to be happening soon.
What's a good book, or what do you have on your nightstand these days that you could share with our audience that might have some touch points with what we've been talking about?
Look, on the entrepreneurial, there's plenty of books about cyber war and all these things out there. I think what I bring to the table is how do you build companies now, particularly companies that help in a cyber war like scenario. So I'm rereading a book called Crossing the Chasm right now, which is a book about how you build early stage tech companies and kind of get them to cross that chasm into a widely adopted technology. So it's very easy it's generally very easy to find enthusiasts and early adopters for any technology, but how do you find mass adoption for that technology and solve real problems? And it's a very hard thing to do. And I think even though it's probably almost a 30-year-old book now, it's still totally relevant. And 6 years into my entrepreneurial journey, I thought it was time that I reread it.
Outstanding. Well, we will have links to that book and the other items that we touched upon in the show notes. And with that, Hank Thomas, thank you so much for being on the Cognitive Crucible.
Thanks for having me, John.
The Cognitive Crucible is the only podcast dedicated to increasing interdisciplinary collaboration between information operations practitioners, scholars, and policymakers. To find out more about the Information Professionals Association, visit us at information-professionals.org. Please support our podcast by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review.